For our iris material, we will actually be able to copy most of the components from the sclera because both pieces of the eye kind of work within the same structure. And so first thing I want to do is copy those components. We don't need the principled BSDF, but all of these, I will B box select, Control C to copy, jump over to the iris, Control V to paste, and then move them over in preparation to connect them to the principled BSDF. Now I want to start with the same order that we approached the sclera, and that is with the color gradient. It should be all white according to the sclera, but if we just move these flags upward, we'll start to see the red creep in along the edge. And now we can change this to be whatever color eye that we want. I'm going to start with this brown eye up here. I think a lot of these are kind of extraordinarily brilliant eyes, whether they've been photoshopped or just they're more rare colors. I think a more common color to start with will be the brown. And so basically this ramp needs to be brown in the middle, which we could color pick, I suppose, if we wanted. And then I will Control C, copy and paste this to both flags and simply take our color way down, basically to black. As we can see in the reference, it kind of starts black around the outside, turns to brown, and then darkens again once it reaches the pupil. So let's just copy this darker brown and paste it over here. And then I can adjust the flag positions till we see that darker color creep in along the edge of the iris as well as the pupil. All right, this is looking much better. Now, all right, this is looking pretty good. Now we are using a very small chunk of the gradient. So if you wanted to use more of it, you would want to adjust the position, like move it further either forward or back, probably backward, I guess. So in the negative value. And then you'd have to readjust your flags. But just for simplicity's sake, I'm going to keep the mapping the same because we'll get along fine with the smaller spectrum. And then I'm going to slowly kind of branch out and see which components are going to work for this material, because it can be a little overwhelming if you try to deal with the whole material. So I'd highly recommend going component by component. And I don't really remember what this gradient was for, so I'm going to remove it in an effort to simplify where I can. Now this one we will be using again, which is this subtract method. Remember, it creates that harsh line around the center if I move the flags a little bit higher. And the reason I want to maintain this is because we see this sort of pattern within all irises as far as I know to some degree. All right, if we go check out another one, you can see it here kind of populating this margin around the pupil. Here you can see it as well. It's almost like if this was a volcano, it's the rim of the volcano. That's kind of how it feels to me. Here's a great example. I think this looks like either a volcano or a crater on the moon type thing. And so we want to keep this subtract component because it will become this rim of the volcano. And now we can move into the components that make up the detailed pattern. We'll start with the first Voronoi. I'll shift control click on the color ramp. And I'm going to turn off the linear light that is kind of wobbling our Voronoi pattern. So I'll select that and hit the M key to mute it. And the Voronoi will still accomplish the main pattern. We'll go back to our primary eye. I should also say that I'm focusing on this as the primary. Even though all eyes have a similar structure, each iris pattern is unique. So instead of creating an amalgamation, I think focusing on just one is going to be our best bet. And so what I want to do to this Voronoi is actually invert the colors. I'm thinking also in terms of how this will affect the bump map. And currently with the white edges, which we use for our veins, those would poke out. And I want the opposite effect, where the black will actually push out like a sort of like a bubble. And so let's find that color ramp and flip it around. There we go. That should work pretty well. And I want to stretch it a bit more. So in that Y value of the normal typed mapping node, let's go up to 10. All right, so hopefully you can see the correlation from the reference to this pattern. These sort of rounded bulges sucking towards the pupil. And I might go a little bit further, like 15. Yeah, I think that's going to work out pretty well. And then let's try to ease in our linear light one more time. If we unmute it, it completely destroys the pattern. So maybe linear light is too strong of an operation. So how about we soften it with overlay? Okay. Can't really see a difference as I pull that up. I still can't really see a difference. we're all the way at 1. So how about I increase the scale value of the noise texture? Maybe the roughness go all the way up to 1. Okay, now we're starting to see some effect. If I turn it on and off, this is off. All right, very smooth bubbles, turn it on. Now we've got some slight squiggle in the pattern. All right, so that's gonna work out well for the first layer. And the second layer, I want it to be this more stringy, sinewy type pattern that's also stretching towards the pupil. So similar as the vein, it's like a duplicate at a smaller frequency. We'll do the same thing of muting the texture coordinate manipulation and increasing the stretch. Let's go to like 20. I want this to be significantly stretched, maybe 30. There we go, that's looking pretty good. Maybe balance out the gradient flags a bit better. And then we will mix this over top of our initial pattern. All right, so I'll change it to, let's just go with a straight mix. And then I want it to be more of the first pattern. So how about 0.2? There we go. Mostly the first pattern with a little bit of that stringy, sinewy secondary pattern over top of it. Yeah, I think a mix will be fine. Of course, we can change this later if we need. And then we will want a third pattern. But before I duplicate that, let's reincorporate the texture coordinate manipulation. I will unmute that, and we'll probably have to do the same thing where we switch to overlay to get a bit more of a subtle effect. And let me just focus on the second layer by itself. All right, so yeah, it's the same situation where we're not seeing a ton of effect with overlay. Let's increase the roughness. Okay, we do start to see an effect there. All right, so this is off and this is on, just starts to, squiggle those lines, which I think is corroborated by the reference. And, we can take up the detail level higher as well, like 20. Actually, that does do a lot more. How about we go to 0.5? It's a much higher frequency kind of breakup of the pattern. So how about 15 instead of 20? Yeah, maybe I'll just leave it at 10 actually. Started to get away from me once I got above 10. Yeah, even from 10 to 12, it starts to get a little crazy. 11? Okay, 11's more what I want. Okay, so we've got the texture coordinates manipulated. And the reason why I like to have that as an option is with it turned off, things are just way too straight usually. And you rarely see straight things happen in organic structures. So as a principle, kind of wobbling things out lends itself more to realism. All right, I do want a third layer based on these same components. So I'm going to B-box select all of these. Shift Control D to move that up. And then I'll just offset them. I don't like the root connection kind of breaking the flow. So I like to, just clean that up a little bit. And then I'll move these back over. I only recently in the last year started to take node organization seriously. And just like modeling or anything else, I'm starting to become a little OCD with it. But my materials are much more readable than they ever were previously. So we've got this new component, and we're not going to use the normal type of mapping. I'm going to switch back to point. And remember, when we do that, the scale value is way off by comparison to the normal type. So if I remember correctly, I think like 250 is a comparable pattern. Once again, we'll turn off the overlay of the texture coordinate manipulation. And yeah, about 250 is where I want to be, at least starting off with this Voronoi pattern. And we're going to do the same thing of stretching the pattern in the Y value, but it's not going to be towards the pupil. So let me go up significantly higher, like 100. Okay, this serves to kind of squash the pattern and give it a really fine swirly pattern around the pupil. And this is coming from, if we look at the reference image, this pattern here, which seems to hug the sort of outside third of the iris. And so if we invert the texture or the gradient, all right, we get a lovely texture with which we can mix in right here. All right, so let's add a reroute node and plug that into the bottom socket. And I might make this an overlay actually. Shift Control, click on that so we see the combination. Bring up the influence, let's say to 0.5. Yeah, okay, so we've got these sort of ridges that look great next to the reference. The only thing is I might want to kind of limit their influence towards the outside half or outside third. And so I'll need another gradient to do that. In hindsight, I guess this is where I could have used that original gradient that I deleted. But let's go ahead and move these down. Shift Control duplicate to get a new gradient. And we'll use this as a factor. Let's swap it around. Again, the black will not inherit this pattern and the white will. So something like this, and plug it into our factor. Let's make it a little more readable. I don't know, that's kind of a mess in there, but you know, what are you gonna do? All right, so now the pattern is limited. As I bring down the black, or bring up the black, you can see it start to creep in towards the pupil. But okay, that's good for those 3 patterns. Now, I do actually want a 4th pattern. And this comes back to the volcano idea. If this is the rim of the volcano, there's an even smaller, sinewy interior to that volcanic edge. I hope you don't mind the volcano metaphor here. And so I want to duplicate this pattern one more time. We'll go ahead and take the Voronoi because we will be using that normal mapping setup. Shift Control D, move it off to the side and above. We'll take the proper connection for cleanliness. And the way I want to mix it in, again, is to use this subtract. So I want a white and black factor based on this, but I don't want any of these brighter values to be below 1. So I need to convert this with a converter color ramp, change the interpolation to constant, and then as I drag the white flag way down, we should gradually see all these values diminish into a kind of binary white or black mask. And on the black part, we'll put that little sinewy pattern. The only thing I'm not sure about is the black spots on the outside, but also it could be kind of a unique detail to have in the iris. So let's try keeping it and see how it turns out. We're going to be mixing with a straight up mix, and we'll use this as the black and white factor. And so then we'll take, remember this pattern, which is the first 3 layers. That will go into, let's see, needs to be into slot 2 because that's the white color of the factor. And then our 4th layer will go into slot 1. And we didn't even adjust the first layer. So I'm sorry, the 4th layer. Basically, I want to increase the scale to like 30, maybe even 40 to make it much finer. And yeah, I guess that's pretty much it. Maybe just to ensure the principle of variety, we change the scale value to like 2. Yeah, sure, why not? All right, so now it's definitely different. And let's see what that looks like combined. All right, so we've got pattern 1, which is the first 3 layers of Voronoi, and then pattern 4 by itself on the interior. Now let's mix it with our color ramp. All right, that's where this old soft light comes into play. So let's move these over. And then this becomes, let's see, slot 2, and we will disconnect the factor. Shift Control click on this. And in order to see it without the sclera, we can temporarily jump over to that material and add a shader transparent BSDF. Shift Control click on it, and that essentially hides the sclera material back to the iris. We can see what that mix looks like. It looks pretty good. Compare that to our reference. Maybe increase the value a little bit. That's all the way at 1. You know, not all of this color comes from just this input. You know, that's a combination of reflections as well. So in other words, I'm not going to commit fully to like a full soft light. But that should be good for our color input. Let's see what it looks like next to, well, plugged into the material. And for this, I suppose we need the sclera back. So Shift Control click on the principled BSDF. And it renders really, really dark. Now, I don't really know why this is the case, but it always happens where despite the color values of the iris being what I want, matching the reference whenever it's at full emission value, once it's plugged into the material, it's super dark. And so honestly, I kind of wonder with this transmission if it's fully transmissive or if it's, you know, sort of like the default color value, you know, instead of being white, it's at 0.8 value instead of 1. So I don't really know what's going on. The only way I can sort of remedy it is by adding a hue, saturation, and value node. So color, and then cranking up the value way beyond normal limits. So like, let's try just doubling it to 2, and we can start to see a little bit of brown, but nowhere near the type of brown we see over here. How about 5? All right, once we go up to 5, we're more in that realm, maybe a 4. But part of me doesn't like this because whenever you go to values above 1, you're kind of breaking the physically accurate boundary. So of course the standard of physical accuracy is there to help keep things balanced. But as an artist, if I have to break those boundaries, I'm fine with it. And so with our color established, let's derive a bump map out of this combination here. Or actually, should it be here? It should probably be before, maybe this combination here, where we have the richest black and white values. All right, so let's add a reroute node because we can source it from here and plug it into our gradient for easy manipulation. And then also the biggest thing that comes from the bump map is, going back to that volcano metaphor, the interior pattern needs to be overall darker values than the exterior pattern. All right, so we can do that with the mask that we created here. All right, so if we simply take this, add a color mix RGB node, and we will be multiplying. Let's shift control click on that. And as we multiply, the darker values are concentrated on the inside. The outside are brighter values, which, oh, I didn't set it to multiply. I set it to mix, which, I don't know, maybe that could be okay. We might try both. Let's try 0.3 as a mix instead of a multiply. We've got this color ramp not really doing anything, but it's there in case we need to adjust it. Let's see what the bump looks like. Okay, 0.05 might be too small. How about 0.2? Oh yeah, look at that. That looks pretty cool. Oh, we did invert it. All right, so let's uncheck the inversion, because if we don't uncheck that, then the opposite of this behavior is happening. So how about we go to 0.5 on the mix? I feel like it's blurring out the outside pattern too much, but it does look pretty good once it's converted to a normal map, or a bump map rather. So yeah, I think this looks pretty good. All right, we'll plug that into our normal socket for the material for Principled BSDF. And now can we see that pattern showing up? Probably not that much until we have more specular. All right, so I do like to increase the specular generally. So we'll go to 0.5. And I actually like to add some metallic, or at least try metallic, because sometimes that added punch of the metallic reflections gives it, that gem-like quality to the eye. But, too much metallic can definitely be a problem. I do like the roughness at 0.5, a little bit higher. How about we take the specular tint all the way up? All right, that's going to incorporate the base color into the color of the specular. Rather than just white reflections, we're getting more colored reflections, which I think mimics what we see in the eye. And I think we're in a pretty good spot, certainly to do a test. All right, so we'll switch to slot 2, or rather slot 4. And do a render test. Okay, that is much cleaner. We can see our pattern at play. Let's hit Alt-J to see the before. So no iris pattern. Now with the iris pattern. And, if we compare it to our reference, we're in the ballpark. I think right now what I don't like is the pupil, how there's such a sharp fall off right at the edge of the pupil. So perhaps I could bring down our color flag a little bit to kind of darken the inside. Something like that. Or, right now we have the pupil modeled as geometry, and maybe that's not the right call. I don't know. I'm going to keep that in mind because it wouldn't be hard to just eliminate the geometric pupil and add a shader component to, black out the pupil with the ability to control how harsh the fall off is. So I don't know. I'm going to keep that in mind. But as far as constructing the iris material, I'm very happy with what we've done. Now we can pretty easily change the color of the iris. So if we find a different example like this one, something a little more extreme, we can totally do that where, it's kind of a turquoise blue into yellowy green and then into kind of like a bluish, almost brown in the interior. If we just shift Control D to duplicate our color ramp and then adjust for those colors. So again, it's kind of dark on the outside. Let's define our central color first, which would be, I suppose, this kind of turquoise color. Let's increase the saturation because a lot of that is lost throughout the shading process. So we'll copy this turquoise, paste it here. The reason I don't want to use the existing black is because it is, if we lighten this, it's a brownish black. All right, so I want to paste the turquoise and then make it a dark turquoise. Otherwise, you'll start to see some artifacts of brown start to appear. So we'll take that much darker and then paste the turquoise again, but shift it towards, take our hue value over into this yellowy range, yellowy green. And then one more flag, we'll make it kind of a darker brownish color. Desaturated, yeah, something like this, maybe a little darker. All right, let's see what that looks like plugged into our shader. Let's see, I think to make this easier, rather than zooming out and trying to connect this noodle a great distance, I'll just add a reroute node and we can plug it into the reroute node instead. All right, so we're already in the spectrum of this other iris pattern, and not quite as much of the saturation was lost as I expected, but we can easily, with this hue saturation and value node, take that down globally, like 0.8, and then maybe increase the value to like, let's go to 5, maybe even higher, because this is a pretty bright color. What about like 8? Yeah, so we're pretty close. And this is definitely telling me that the harsh geometric fall off of the pupil is probably not the right direction to go. So I'm feeling more confident about changing that. And yeah, while that does look pretty good and we clearly have some evidence in photographic reference, but this is a pretty wild color. It's just a little less believable to me. So I will do one more and make it a more believable blue eye. All right, so I actually probably should have duplicated the brown one since it's only 3 flags. All right, same kind of thing. We'll find a blue color. We'll make it very light. Maybe take the saturation. Let's leave the saturation high and control it like we were with the hue saturation value node. And then take that blue, Control C to copy, paste it to the blacks, and take those values down. All right, plug this into our reroute. Yeah, and this should be a little more natural. Let's go back down to 5 on the value. Let's take the saturation down as well. Maybe even lower on the value. Yeah, I think that's looking pretty good. Let's do a render of this, and that will be the final one for this lesson. I think that looks pretty good. Let's look at it full size. And yeah, I think I definitely need to adjust the pupil in the future once I come back and readdress the eyes. But I love the way that the eye white gradually becomes the iris. I think that looks very believable. Maybe some specularity can be adjusted in the iris material as well, but it's a great start. Again, the idea of kind of letting the first version marinate, think about the changes as the context fully develops so that we can make more informed decisions as we perfect this. Because even here in the eye, we're missing important context like the eyelashes and the meniscus. And oh, speaking of eyelashes or what looks like a hair follicle, I forgot I was supposed to fix that weird artifact there. So let me do that real quick before I end this lesson, because I think I know what's going on here. I think it's a sculpt multi-res artifact. So let's leave rendered view. I'm going to select our head, Shift H to hide everything else. And in my modifiers, let's make sure that I'm sculpting at the highest level. Jump into sculpt mode. And let's take a look at what's going on in the upper eyelid. Yeah, okay, that's what I thought it was. So this is a classic multi-res artifact where some verts just kind of go haywire. And they really do seem to be a single vertex. And so you get these really sharp points. And the best way to solve them is with a smooth brush. All right, so if we grab the smooth brush, it can be a little bit difficult to like affect that single vertex easily. You can see me clicking and nothing's happening. You know, what if I switch to the grab brush? Because the grab brush, okay, that gives me the little reticle. You see how it snaps to the verts? But does the smooth brush not do that? No, it does too. So it should be happening here. Let's see, maybe try another brush. Basically, I want that little reticle to click on the end. Oh, I think I know why. Okay, yeah, in our modifier, we kept the sculpt base mesh only, so it's trying to snap to the base mesh verts. That's not what we want. Let's turn that off and try this again. There we go. Now we can see it snapping. I'm going to turn off X symmetry because I don't see this same artifact happening on the other side. So I don't want to inadvertently smooth some good poor detail over there. All right, so I'm going to wait till the reticle, snaps to the end and then click basically one at a time. Kind of annoying, but kind of important. I do not want to smooth out any poor detail. And technically it's fine as long as it's just inside the eyelid. Here we've got a few others that weren't seen in the render, but while I'm here, I might as well do my due diligence and smooth it out the best I can. Then I want to see if there's any on the other side that could potentially cause problems. Yeah, it's just kind of a annoying little ugly part of the sculpture that I want to fix. Okay, I think we've remedied that problem. Again, this is fairly common when it comes to multi-res, so thankfully they're not too difficult to fix as long as it's not a crazy explosion of vertices. All right, so I'm going to save my file, and we are done with the iris for now. One more look at the render.